Hiya, I'm Bruce Fumi. This is the second in my series of 3 videos on the Crofters, land wars and Skye. If you haven't seen the first one, then click the white tab above to go back to that. If you have already seen that, then this is the video for you. Now, if you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then you can click on the subscribe button at the bottom right hand side of the screen at any time during this video. And also don't forget that you'll find additional information, books, way to support the channel in the description below. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Last time we were on MacDonald land in Braes. Today we're in MacLeod country. This is Glendale. This had been part of MacLeod clan land since, originally Scandinavian settlers who came with the Vikings. Over many years in Skye they'd fought with the MacDonalds. They'd fought for this land. They'd bled for this land. They'd died for this land. And yes, the chief would lead them, and he lived in the castle at the other side of Loch Dunvegan. But the land was theirs. By the time the 19th century arrived, the land no longer belonged to the children of those who had bled. It was owned by the children of those who had led. And so the people of Glendale, and specifically Miliveg, further up the road, paid rent not to their chief, but to their landlord. In 1852, the 25th MacLeod of MacLeod didn't even live at Dunvegan Castle. He didn't even live on Skye. He just owned lands here. At some point, somebody had changed the rules and he was able to live comfortably in London and just sell the lands in Skye, for which your ancestors had fought and died. He sold to one of his London neighbours, as it happens. This neighbour, John Macpherson MacLeod, had studied at English public school and then went to India and made his fortune in Madras. When he bought Glendale, he was living near Hyde Park with a butler, a footman, his wife, a cook, housemaid and lady's maid. Of course, he didn't come to Skye. Oh, no. He had somebody else run the estate for him. The estate was managed by a guy called Donald Tormore MacDonald. Tormore had several of his own farms from Nairnshire all the way up to Skye here, and he seemed like just the man to manage the land for this London investor. Now, when our London investor died, the Skye estates were left in trust to the children of his nephew. The Crofters paid rent to the trust and they worked the land that their ancestors had fought and died for. There had been blood, there had been sweat, there would be tears. Since time immemorial there had been 8 crofts in the township of Miliveg up the road. But not long before our story started, they'd been subdivided to accommodate people who had been cleared from land nearby. You see, the people were moved from pasture to pasture just like the sheep. And now 17 crofts had to eke out an existence in the same land on which 8 had thrived. Oh, and the best hill pasture had been hived off to create a sheep run over the hill, which was leased out to a doctor. Dr. Martyrs, honest, felt that the solution to the Crofters' lack of land was that the people here should move off to the Americas where there was plenty of land. They thought there was plenty of land right next to their crofts. It was just it was him that had it. Now a gallery called the Kelpies. The good doctor's farm was called Waterstein. Now if you're wondering where Waterstein is, it's in the area that you'll drive through on the way to Niche Point Lighthouse, which is just over there and well worth a visit incidentally. So we have land owned by a trust on behalf of distant children, managed by an incoming wealthy farmer and rented to an antagonistic landed doctor who thinks that the people that belong to the land should be sent across an ocean. Trying to make a living out of half the land they had previously, the Crofters had no time for the land to lie fallow. Poorer crop yield, twice the families cutting peat, so even more land reduced. And things were about to get worse. Some of the Crofters had to turn to the more dangerous work of fishing to make ends meet. When winds were too strong to make the shore of Miliveg itself, fishermen for safety would moor their boats here on the south side of the peninsula and walk over Waterstein Farm to get home. And in fact, a Tormore banned them from mooring their boats on this side of the hill, forcing them to brave the more dangerous waters. Next, in a relatively barren landscape, he banned them from collecting driftwood on the shore. Then he banned these small-scale farmers from having working dogs in case they bothered the doctor's sheep here in Waterstein. Crofters' dogs were poisoned. One lady, Mrs. Ross, was walking across the hill with a dog, and when the dog stopped to drink from a well, the gamekeeper shot it dead. At court, the keeper was fined 10 shillings. That led to threats of eviction, and Tormore got an injunction banning all the Crofters from setting foot anywhere here in Waterstein. Everything that could have been done to them had been done to them. You would think so. And then Tormore set up a shop. Now, there were already 5 or 6 tenant Crofters running their own little shops in the area. The competition, if you will. Tormore decided that those running shops should pay a higher rent. He then decided that anyone using the shops should also pay a higher rent. Crofters were already struggling to pay the rent for half the land they had previously. There were double the people cutting peats, restrictions on them collecting driftwood, more danger in supplementing their lifestyle with fishing. Now they couldn't sell what little surpluses they might have, and they had to pay Tormore's shop prices or face higher rents. The Crofters got together and decided on a rent strike. What else could they do? It must have felt like they were in a long, dark tunnel with no way out. And then they saw light at the end.
What to me?
On the 15th of May 1882, Dr. Martin was giving up his lease. Yes! The Crofters made an offer to take over Waterstein for the same rent as Dr. Martin had been paying. Better grazing, enough resources for all the people, and the trustees would have the same income as before. It's the perfect solution. Indeed, at a public meeting, Factor Tormore promised to put the proposal to the trustees, telling them that there were no competing offers, so they were sure to be accepted. It took a bit of waiting, but finally the Crofters heard that the lease to the Waterstein farm had been awarded to the Factor Tormore. The dirty swine. Not only had Tormore reneged on his promise, but the Christian-minded trustees, rather than grant land to Crofters in desperate need of it, granted a lease to Tormore, who had no family or mouths to feed, just profit to be accumulated. This monument is on the road to Glendale in Millavig. You'll pass it if you visit. When Tormore drove some sheep up from his Nairnshire property to stock the farm, the Crofters of Glendale blocked the way and wouldn't let his sheep onto the land. They threw his sheep off the land, and he threw his toys out of the pram. He gave up the lease and his role as factor, and he went off to farm his other properties. Now, the sensible thing to do, the conciliatory thing to do, the humane thing to do was to allow the Crofters of Millavig to pay the increased rent that they so willingly offered for the added land they desperately needed. You know that's not what they did. They brought in a replacement factor from Perthshire. A man with no Gaelic was appointed as the go-between for the English-speaking trustees and the Gaelic-speaking Crofters. Instead of renting the farm, they bought Tormore's sheep and employed shepherds to staff the sheep run, and the Crofters continued in hunger. But they refused to pay rent, and they defied or ignored the court orders that arrived in connection with Waterstein Farm. The Lord Lieutenant of Inverness-shire and the Sheriff of Inverness, William Ivory, do you remember that name? They decided that there was only one solution, and they wrote to Scotland's top legal officer at Westminster. Gunboats. Send Marines, send police, and send gunboats to terrorise the Skye Crofters into obedience. Now, even to Victorian ears, that sounded a bit extreme. As a more measured response, they sent in extra police and recruited more for the future. Now, they didn't want a repeat of the fiasco of the Battle of the Braes. That was terrible. If you haven't already seen my video on the Battle of the Braes, then it's the first in this sequence of 3, and it's worth a watch. There should be a link in the white tab above there. Anyway, the authorities decided that they were going to be more careful this time. And on Tuesday the 16th of January, 6 experienced policemen headed for this house. I don't really know why experience was in quotation marks, but it was in quotation marks in the book, The Glendale Martyrs, and I kind of wanted to be authentic, eh? They were to stay at this white house over my shoulder. It's called Hamara Lodge. But before they reached the lodge, they were turned back by 400 crofters. Okay, back to the drawing board. The next day, a messenger at arms was sent to deliver summonses to 5 of the crofters, requiring them to appear in court in Edinburgh. And he got his backside kicked from the Glendale bridge all the way back off the Glendale estate. That didn't work. Gunboats it is then. Maybe just one gunboat. In fact, a semi-retired gunboat. Instead of Marines, send a negotiator. Oh, make sure he speaks Gaelic. How often are Crofters and Skye the subject of questions to the Prime Minister in the London Parliament? The answer is, in the 1880s, all the time. On the 9th of February 1883, HMS Jackal dropped anchor here in Loch Pultiel. There was a meeting in the church where an official told the people of Glendale that they had to give up John Macpherson, Malcolm Matheson, Donald MacLeod and John Morrison. They would be taken back in HMS Jackal to court in Edinburgh. They had to take all their stock off the Waterstein farm, and they had to write a letter promising to obey all the conditions and provide security relating to Waterstein. Their grievances would be heard in Edinburgh, and that way we can avoid the need to send troops. Left with little choice, the Crofters said, "No, we won't send the letters that you're looking for. 3 of the 4 men will travel to Edinburgh, but not on your boat, on their own steam, voluntarily. But John Morrison's no coming." "What? Oh, why's that?" "Because he's currently away on duty with the Royal Navy, ya spanner." "He's not on your boat, is he?" You can read the long story in the book The Glendale Martyrs. I'll leave a link in the description below. The short version is that 3 men travelled to Edinburgh and they were found in contempt of court for failing to comply with court orders. And they were sentenced to 2 months in prison. At the trial, they didn't get to make the representations of their grievances as they had been promised. But during their 2 months in prison, a royal commission was set up, and it was set up to look into the issue of land tenure and conditions of crofters in the Highlands. Even the Prime Minister, Gladstone, knew that something had to be done to redress the power balance in island land tenure, and that shipping people off to Manitoba was no solution at all. As soon as he was released from prison in Edinburgh, the spokesman John Macpherson travelled back here to Skye and arrived here in Millaveg to appear as the first witness at the Napier Commission. When he'd climbed onto the steamer to take him south 2 months earlier, John Macpherson had announced to the tearful crowd, "If I was going to jail for a sheep or a lamb, you might be very sorry. But as it is, you ought to be very glad, for we go to uphold a good cause. We go to defend the widow and the fatherless and comfort the needs of hearth and home." Is it always wrong to break the law in protest? The war wasn't over, but they'd won another battle. I wonder what happens in episode 3. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up and share it. I mean, Dochas going to be la malai. Cheery and Rasta. They'll leave it looking out there.